This video was supposed to be a quick look into RX 6600 performance, but it has turned into something much more than that. There seems to be a problem with AMD cards in Star Citizen. In the past, I've done some testing with older, lower powered AMD cards. They've all had this same issue where in Lorville in particular, performance just completely tanks occasionally. It affects the overall results and it kind of means that Nvidia's equivalent cards just perform better. My assumption up until this point has been that AMD cards just can't quite handle running out of VRAM in the same way that Nvidia cards do. The 6GB Nvidia cards seem to handle this better. They have these slowdowns, but they don't have them anywhere near to the same extent as the AMD cards. So, there was a deal on eBay, load of money off on this RX 6600, good deal, got Starfield as well, and I thought, well, let's pick this up and see how this performs. It's got 8GB of VRAM. It's really targeted at 1080p, but it should be significantly better than my minimum spec GPU. So, first of all, let's start with the main system I've got. 7800X3D, 32GB of RAM, details in the description if you want to see them. In Lorville, we've just done a quick test here with 1080p and 1440p and 4K, and you'll see that this is a 1080p card. There's no chance that this is going to be good for 1440p in Star Citizen, and so that is all the 1440p and 4K testing I'm going to give you. We'll come back to Lorville later. Area 18 gives us an idea of how this card, in theory, should perform versus the 1660. It's significantly better, and it's a good result. In fact, that would be a great 1080p result for this card. The 4080, in all of the results you're going to see, is CPU bound. It's not showing the full potential of the 4080 in any way. The same on the Horizon Roof, a good result for the RX 6600. It's significantly faster than the 1660, as you would expect it to be based on all the other tests and results you'd see on the internet. And while we're on the rooftop here, let's just look at the different cloud settings. As always, very high clouds are not to be recommended really for any cards, but here it just is no good, and really medium. I can't see much difference between medium and high when I've tested before. Down in the city of Horizon, this render thread test that I do, still we're on the GPU here, apart from the 4080, which is still CPU bottlenecked, and again, we're significantly ahead of the 1660. And the last of the normal results that we're going to see, out in space, the AMD card is again significantly ahead of the 1660, but really there's nothing going on in space and any of these results are great. Here is where things start to get interesting. This isn't the most interesting thing, but we're about to go downhill. In quantum travel, it matches the 1660. Now, you might think, well, that's just a weird bug or something, but I have seen this sort of performance before. When I tested the 17900 XTX, we found the similar thing, that even though the 4080 and the 7900 XTX are basically matched all the way through, in quantum travel, it just doesn't perform anywhere near as well as the 4080. And so my guess here is that in quantum travel in particular, the workload that it is on the graphics card, it's just much harder for the AMD cards to get through that work. It doesn't really matter because it's not crazy difference performance, and in reality, CIG are going to change quantum travel, and we may see that the way that they do the graphics for this changes the load on the graphics cards. But this starts to highlight the fact that different GPU architectures perform differently in different scenes, and normally you'd say that in different games, but in Star Citizen we have these different workloads that affect the cards differently. Let's move on to what's the most significant testing, and I think I'm getting slightly concerned now that there is an actual issue with AMD cards. We're in Lorville, and I've popped the 3080 in these results as well, just to highlight the fact that the 3080 and 4080 are CPU bottleneck. Just remember that there's no difference in 1080p between those two cards, but you'll see here a much smaller gap than we've seen in the other cities for the 6600 and the 1660. And really the 1% lows are a hint of what is going on here. This card, even with 8GB of VRAM, is struggling in Lorville. And for some reason, in the testing I've done, we have this thing where you see the display info goes red when the VRAM is, the engine thinks the VRAM is running out. And even with 8GB, this is happening on this card, and it seems as though AMD cards just don't manage the memory as well as Nvidia cards do. So it has these slowdowns like we've seen with these other cards, even with 8GB of memory. And I'll show you them here on this frame rate graph. You see there's just sections where occasionally the frame rate will just bottom right out. It goes really low, lower than it has been all the way around, and this isn't consistent between runs, and for some reason you just lose a load of performance. Now, what I'll say about this is that the way I test is that I come in and out of servers, and when you first open up the game and you go in, that doesn't happen. But if you were to change servers a few times, I would think you would see the same thing that I'm seeing here. This is a PCIe 4 card, but it's only got 8 lanes. And so I thought, well, let's change it to 3. Let's change it to Gen 3 and see, does that completely tank performance? And you'll see it does affect the 1% lows, but actually the average is kind of the same. So this does affect things, and it does hint that, again, it's a memory, maybe a memory bandwidth issue, but it doesn't really explain what I'm about to show you. Next, I swapped across to my minimum spec system, or one of them. I've got the 10400, the i5 10400. These results don't really make much sense to me. These cards should perform pretty much the same. Neither of them are actually GPU bottlenecked in Lorville on the minimum spec system because the CPU is under such load. Lorville is now absolutely brutal again. But we're seeing a significant drop between the two cards. And the faster card, the 6600, is way worse, and the 1% lows are much worse. So seeing as the CPU is the big bottleneck on this system, my wondering or guess here is that, is the AMD card just hammering the CPU more than the NVIDIA card? And we can talk about NVIDIA driver overheads and DX11 being more optimized on NVIDIA maybe. What is going to be really interesting is to retest this once we've got Vulkan in, because that could make a significant issue. So I'm definitely going to keep hold of this card. I think the main thing to take from this is that there seems to be something going on. I'd love if you've got one of these cards, or maybe again an 8GB AMD card, to let me know if you get these kind of slowdowns, big drops in performance that kind of then seem to resolve themselves. I guess the next step is to pick up a 6700 XT, which I think has got 10 or 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and see again, can we outmatch this? Can we go so far with VRAM that actually that stops being the issue? Because again, the engine seems to be thinking that there isn't enough VRAM, even though that isn't the case on NVIDIA cards. In theory, this card is actually kind of perfect for 1080p. It's significantly better than the 1660, but with this issue, I just can't recommend it at this point.